I think it's pretty safe to say that Pixar is one of the most consistent animation studios going today. Even, in my opinion, some of their more lesser work is still enjoyable. And so, with Soul coming out, I think it's high time that I sit myself down and rank every single Pixar movie ever. Now, when it comes to stuff like this, as I say all the time, this is my subjective opinion. So if you like or hate any of the movies in my order, that is totally fine. You are free to like whatever you like. Agree or disagree with whatever you feel about my list, I welcome wholeheartedly. And these will not be necessarily reviews. I do plan on reviewing all the Pixar movies one day, but for right now, this is just going to be a straight-up ranking. So with all that out of the way, let's all jump on the letter I, because today I'm going to be ranking every Pixar movie ever. Number 23, Cars 2. When it comes to Pixar, everyone's favorite punching bag is Cars 2. And yeah, it's not hard to see why. This is definitely the weakest of Pixar's output. And it all comes down to one thing. Larry the Cable Guy. Now, before I go any further, I just want to say that Larry the Cable Guy is a funny man. Larry the Cable Guy does a lot of good in this world. But in this movie, Larry the Cable Guy ruins everything. Larry the Cable Guy in the Cars movies is like ketchup on French fries. A little goes a long way. But unfortunately, in this movie, there are no more fries. It's just a big thing of ketchup. Because Mater is everywhere in this movie, despite the fact that Lightning McQueen is literally the first thing that you see on the poster. I definitely don't like to poke fun at stuff that literally everyone else has poked fun at, but, I mean, there's no getting around that Cars 2 is the worst Pixar movie ever. Number 22, Cars 3. I think in terms of the differences between Cars 2 and Cars 3 is that Cars 3 kind of feels like a bit of an overcorrect. It's the second best of the series, but at the same time, it's also the most forgettable. With a very familiar story of aging sports legend is being forced to leave, but he feels like he's not done yet. There's the plucky upstart who's just a mentee, but by the end takes the place. There's the bad men of business, voiced by Nathan Fillion. I could go on, but I'm sure you all get my point. This is the best animation of the Cars trilogy, but the fact that Cars is even a trilogy to begin with, I'm not sure if that's the best look. Number 21, Cars 1. Out of all the Cars movies, this is my favorite of the bunch. However, it's still just kind of there. I do like the look of Radiator Springs. It feels like one of those towns that you wouldn't stumble across unless you were literally lost. But it looks really nice. And I did enjoy the chemistry between Sally Field and Owen Wilson, but at the same time, the movie it's kind of there. And with the exception of Cars 2, really the worst thing that a Pixar movie can be is just kind of there. Number 20, Brave. I feel like Brave gets picked on a lot more than it deserves. I think it is a good movie, but I think it leans more on Disney princess tropes rather than Pixar tropes. I do quite enjoy Kelly MacDonald in the movie. Billy Connolly is always nice to hear. And Emma Thompson is great as well. I mean, she's Emma Thompson. Of course she's going to be great. And the dynamic between Merida and her mother is the beating heart of the movie. However, there's just a lot of stuff that feels like it belongs, like I said, in the Disney princess side of things rather than the Pixar side of things. To the point where in Wreck-It Ralph 2, when all the Disney princesses show up, Merida is there. And I don't think it's a coincidence either. Number 19, The Good Dinosaur. Similar to Brave, I don't really think that The Good Dinosaur deserves the reputation it has, because there are some people that do not like this movie at all, ever. And I just have to sit there like, why? I don't think the movie is excellent, but it's still okay. I think the biggest sin of this movie is that it is exceedingly average. With a very familiar story of somebody or something getting lost and having to find their way back home while getting stronger in the process. It's been done to death. And I think that the lack of originality is the Good Dinosaur's biggest sin. Though I will give all the credit in the world for making Sam Elliott a dinosaur. Like, bravo right there. Number 18, Finding Dory. I adore Finding Nemo. Spoiler alert, it's in my top 5. But Finding Dory just feels unnecessary. I feel like they were trying to come up with a Finding Nemo sequel, but didn't know what story they wanted to tell. They couldn't make Nemo lost again, because that's just the same story over and over again. So they tried to do something with Dory, and I appreciate the effort. There is a lot of stuff to enjoy. I like Ellen DeGeneres in the role. Hearing Albert Brooks as Nemo again was very welcome. And all the stuff involving the octopus, voiced by Ed Asner, was really good as well. But I think this feels like one of the more unnecessary movies in Pixar's canon. Well made, sure, but just unnecessary. Number 17, Monsters University. Monsters University is definitely a cliché movie, but I mean, it's a college comedy. There's only so much you can do with that premise. However, I do feel it's one of the more underrated movies in Pixar's canon. Even if it is just for the chemistry between Billy Crystal and John Goodman playing Mike and Sully. I enjoy those two working together, and they have the same chemistry as they did in Monsters, Inc. This movie even has one of the better endings of Pixar, where Mike has a bit of a crisis of confidence and Sully has to talk him out of it, and usually it's the other way around. And Dean Hardscrabble has one of my favorite lines in any Pixar movie, and I mean that without irony or sarcasm. You two have managed to accomplish something together no one ever has. You surprised me. Number 16, Soul. This is the most recent movie that Pixar has released, and I have a feeling I'm going to need to wrestle with this a little longer. But if you want to hear more of my in-depth thoughts, visit my video where I review Soul, Wonder Woman 1984, and Promising Young Woman. It should be linked in the eye in the right-hand corner. Number 15, A Bug's Life. I feel like A Bug's Life is a bit of a small fish in a big pond. It is really good, but it is unfortunately surrounded by quality that, as a result, it gets smothered a little bit. But I still quite enjoy A Bug's Life. I love the story more than anything, about a little ant trying to find warriors to help them fight the grasshoppers, and instead he finds a circus troupe. This could be really silly, but it's actually done in a manner that I really enjoyed. I think A Bug's Life deserves more appreciation than it does. Number 14, Onward. Out of the 2 Pixar releases in 2020, this is my favorite. Onward is one of those movies that I liked when I first saw it, but then has just gotten better and better the more I have thought about it. Onward is a road trip movie. You're not really going to be reinventing the wheel, so to speak. But what I love about the movie is the chemistry between Chris Pratt and Tom Holland, because it is the beating heart of the movie, and it is really good. And the scene at the end where Chris Pratt has one final moment with his dad before he disappears into, I want to say heaven, it is really well done. I hope this movie gets more appreciation in the years to come. Number 13, Incredibles 2. As someone who loves the first Incredibles, when I heard that this movie was being made, that was just the best news I had ever heard. But I think due to the fact that the first Incredibles was so good and set the bar so high, The Incredibles 2 was at a bit of a handicap. But with that out of the way, I still really enjoy this movie. My one big hang-up with this movie is the screenslaver and the twist that happens with there. Not only is the screenslaver kind of a villain, but then the twist kind of feels out of nowhere and felt like it needed a little more build-up. But still, at the end of the day, I think this movie is really good, and out of any incredible sequel that could have been made, I'm glad we got what we got. Number 12, Toy Story 3. I think there are 2 types of people. There are Toy Story 3 people and Toy Story 4 people, and I'm a Toy Story 4 person. But with that out of the way, I do think Toy Story 3 is really good. My one hang-up with the movie is that there are some moments that feel it goes a little too close to being over the top. Also, there are some childish jokes that just feel out of place in a Pixar movie. Like the joke where Mr. Potato Head gets thrown into the sandbox and he comes out and he's like, "There was nothing in there but sand and a couple of Lincoln logs." And Ham is like, I don't think those were Lincoln logs. A poop joke in a Pixar movie. That just feels out of place. But with all that said, I think the movie is still really good, and it wraps up the Andy side of things in a very satisfying way. I just prefer Toy Story 4 over 3. And speaking of Toy Story 4, number 11, Toy Story 4. There are some who found Toy Story 4 to be disappointing because of how they wrote off Woody. Well, to me, I think they wrote off Woody in about as good a fashion as you could ever hope for. If Woody had stayed, then they would have just repeated the same thing that they did with Andy. But even if you took out the Woody stuff, I think this is still really well done. I like all the side characters, the animation is beautiful, this is the best a Toy Story movie has ever looked. And still, at the end of the day, I think this was a touching end to a character that has carried this franchise since day one. Alright folks, we're getting into the top 10, and wow. This has been very difficult, but this is my top 10, and I'm standing by it. Number 10, Coco. Even though I saw this movie at a very late showing, and I had to suffer through 20 minutes of trailers and the god-awful Olaf's Frozen Adventure, I still enjoyed Coco more than I ever thought that I would. Even if you took out the beautiful animation, which at the time I said, that's it, Pixar's never going to look this good again, and I would be proven wrong. The chemistry between Hector and Miguel is one of the best, I want to say, partnerships in any Pixar movie. And also the ending where Miguel sings Remember Me to Coco just touches my heart every time. Number 9, Wallie. A lot of critics say that this movie or this television show is more relevant now than it ever has, but that is especially true in the case of Wallie, because despite the fact that the movie came out in 2008, I feel like in many respects it's more relevant now than it ever has been. But even if you took out all the themes, this is still a very beautiful movie, where two of the main characters, Wallie and Eve, don't really speak to each other outside of Wallie and Eve. There's some scenes where there's little or no dialogue, and it's beautiful. The visual storytelling in this movie is on point. Also, let's give points to Otto for being a pretty menacing villain in the last few minutes of the movie. Number 8, Toy Story 1. The one that started it all. No matter where Pixar goes or what it does, it will continually trace its roots back to Toy Story 1. And that's a great movie to start your brand off with. This was an animated movie made by people either approaching their height or at the height of their powers. Tom Hanks, who had just won an Oscar for Forrest Gump, Tim Allen, who was the star of one of the hottest sitcoms in the world and was a very successful stand-up comedian, John Lasseter, who would oversee Pixar's success into the coming decade. I could go on, but I'm sure you all get my point. My one hang-up about the movie is that some of the animation looks really crude, but let's keep in mind that this movie was made in 1995, and let's just be thankful that this movie got made, period. I used to like this movie the least of the Toy Story movies, but in the coming years, it has grown on me. Number 7, Ratatouille. I hadn't seen Ratatouille in a very long time, but when I subbed in with Rachel over at Rachel's Reviews to do a Talking Disney review for Ratatouille, along with Micah DeZed over at Wimpy Studios, I remember just how great this movie was. Not only does this movie make you really hungry, but there's a really great story to accompany it. Patton Oswalt is someone that I'm not really that big of a fan of, but he does give his best performance here. And in a career that also includes Lawrence of Arabia, I feel that Peter O'Toole as Anton Ego is one of his very best performances. Even if it's just for the scene where he tastes the ratatouille and he is snapped back to his childhood. Like, that scene is just a work of art. Number 6, Up. After seeing Soul, I am now convinced that Pete Docter is Pixar's best director, at least among the current roster. And it's not hard to see why. Just consider, if you will, the first, third of this movie and the last third. The first third tells everything you need to know about Carl Fredricksen and his relationship with his wife Ellie, with no dialogue and incredible music from Michael Giacchino. And then the ending, when he finally reaches Paradise Falls after going on a storm saying, "I just want to get to Paradise Falls." That's his only goal. He finally gets there. He's got everything all set up. He is sat down. He is finally happy. And he starts leafing through Ellie's adventure book, and then he sees a picture. And then he starts turning, and he's like, "Oh, that's our wedding day. And our first anniversary. And when we bought the house." And he sees all the memories that Ellie collected. And to her, the adventure of being married to Carl Fredricksen was the adventure all along. And on the last page it says, "It's time for you to have your adventure now. Love, Ellie." If you're not crying at that, there's something wrong with you. Even if you eliminate all of that, this movie is still great, with Carl's relationship with Russell, and the ending where he gives Russell the Ellie badge. Even Christopher Plummer as Charles Muntz is pretty threatening, and it was surprising how good he was in the movie. Alright, we're now in the top 5, and it's about to get real. Number 5, Monsters, Inc. I think some of you may be scratching your head as to why Monsters, Inc. is at my number 5. Well, I have very good memories with this movie. It's one of the first movies I ever saw in theaters with my dad. But even if I took all the nostalgia out, this is still one of Pixar's very funniest movies. The absurdity of these big monsters being scared of a little girl, it's just really good. This movie also has one of my favorite endings of any Pixar movie ever, where all of this has happened and Mr. Waternoose has been arrested, and Roz was found out to be a spy all along, and she was like, "Now, about the girl." And Sully is like, I just want to take her home. And Roz is like, "Very good. Bring me a door shredder." And Sully's like, "Wait, I can never see her again?" And Roz, kind of seeing the pain in his voice, is like, "That's the way it has to be. I'll give you 5 minutes." And then Sully returning Boo back to her room and like, "Oh, he left me bare." Like, what can I say? That's just awesome. And then my heart breaks when the door shreds. Until Mike, being the good guy that he is, collects all the shreds and reassembles the door. And when you hear "Kitty" for the first time, and Sully's eyes just light up and the movie ends. One of the best Pixar endings ever. Number 4, Inside Out. Inside Out is a movie that has been talked about nearly to death by people far more important than I am. So, if I can add anything to this, I'll just say, I think this is one of the most emotional movies Pixar has ever made. It deals with very complex themes, but at the end of the day, it boils down to the main character, Riley, is having very complex emotions, and she has to navigate them on her own. With another great Pixar ending that after months of kind of struggle, she reconnects with her parents, and it's just fantastic stuff. Also, the stuff with Bing Bong, we can't forget about him. This is the movie that launched Pete Docter into the number 1 spot in terms of Pixar directors, in my opinion. Number 3, The Incredibles. Director Brad Bird is no stranger to directing animated classics. So when it was announced that Pixar had picked him up, there was joy to behold. But despite the fact that The Incredibles came out in 2004, it still holds up tremendously well today. It all boils down to the chemistry between the family. Craig T. Nelson and Holly Hunt have great chemistry. The kids, Dash, Violet, and Jack Jack, are not annoying, and they're actually a lot of fun. There's a lot of entertaining action sequences, especially the ending, and this movie has to have one of the best villains of any Pixar movie in Syndrome, voiced by Jason Lee. If for some reason you have not watched this movie, watch it. Plain and simple. Number 2, Finding Nemo. I told you Finding Nemo was going to be in my top 5. I just didn't say where. I joke, but this is one of the best Pixar movies ever made, and despite the fact that it came out all the way in 2003, it is still a tremendous achievement. This is primarily a story-driven movie. It has some jokes and other things like that. It has entertaining side characters like Bruce. Fish are friends, not food. But at the end of the day, it boils down to one simple idea. A father trying to find his son in an ocean that is just vast. And what I like about the movie is that despite the fact that Marlin kind of comes off a little cloying, he still cares about his son and the accident that happened to him years ago. And the movie provides gravity to the situation of his son is lost, and this is like Armageddon for Marlin. He's got to find him, or he doesn't know what he's going to do with himself. By all respects, this is a beautiful Pixar movie, and it was almost my number 1. However, there was another. And my number 1 favorite Pixar movie is Toy Story 2. I'll go out on a limb and say that Toy Story 2 is not just one of Pixar's very best, not only the best Pixar sequel ever, but one of the best sequels ever made. It takes the characters that we know and throws them into unknown situations. Specifically, Woody learns that he is a very rare toy, and if he stays with Jessie and Stinky Pete, then he will be adored by kids forever, instead of staying with Andy, and he will eventually be forgotten. Toy Story 2 sets up Toy Story 3 and 4 in that Woody knows exactly what he's getting into. He knows that at the end of the day, he will eventually be forgotten by Andy, but he decides to stay with him anyway and cherish the years that he has left. Even if you take out all the Woody stuff, the movie is still excellent, with an entertaining subplot from Buzz Lightyear and all the other toys, and we get to see and introduced one of the best side characters in Toy Story, Jessie. The When Somebody Loved Me scene is just perfection. And that, among other reasons, is why Toy Story 2 is my favorite Pixar movie of all time. Whew! So, that's my Pixar ranking. I hope I didn't turn all you guys off, and I hope that you all enjoyed this video. What are your favorite and least favorite Pixar movies? Leave them in the comments down below. I'd love to hear what you all have to say about this. And also, stay tuned for later this week when I release my DCEU ranking. Look forward to that. But if you like this video, please be sure to leave a like, comment your thoughts down below, and if you like this video and you want to see more like it, hit the subscribe button and click the bell to allow notifications. That way when a new video drops, you'll be the first to know. My name is Ryan Cam, and I'll see you in the next one.